Washington Journal continues.
As part of our Spotlight on Magazine series, we're talking today about the recent cover issue of Wired magazine about the National Security Agency building a new and the country's biggest spy center. The author of that, James Banford, is joining us. He's the author of several books on the NSA as well. I've been following the NSA for many years now. What is the Utah Data Center?
Well, it's an enormous warehouse, basically, where NSA is going to keep all its intercepts, all its communication that it's intercepted, whether it's phone calls or emails or tweets, whatever kind of communications it picks up. It has a place to store them, and then it'll serve as what's known as a cloud. In other words, agency listening posts and the headquarters from different parts of the country will be able to tap into that communications that is stored there and then analyze it. So it's a big storage center for intercepted communications.
Why? Why is this necessary?
Well, because NSA intercepts huge amounts of communications. It intercepts communications all over the world. And, you know, you got a lot of communications, you got to have some place to put it. So that's why they built Utah, the Bluffdale data center.
How does this tie in with what is the role or responsibility of the NSA?
Well, that's what NSA's job is. It basically has three jobs. One is intercepting communications, the other is breaking codes, and the third is making codes for the U.S. So in order to break the code, you've got to intercept the communications, and that's what NSA's been doing since 1952, is putting satellites in space, ground stations, listening posts in communications facilities like AT&T, and sifting through all this data, whether it's a phone call or an email, looking for whatever targets they're looking for.
Of foreign nationals?
Well, looking for whatever targets. I mean, Senator Ted Kennedy was a target for a while. He was on the watch list. He couldn't get on airplanes without being frisked. So anybody can be a target in the United States. There's, there were up to 1 million people on the watch list, and a lot of them are innocent people. A lot of them are there by mistakes. A lot of them are there because they said the wrong word at the wrong time or were in the wrong place at the wrong time and had nothing to do with terrorism.
A little history about the NSA. Established by President Truman on November 4th, 1952, created to conduct post-war era code breaking, as James Banford said. Two missions: gather adversaries' secrets and protect U.S. national security info. On the missions, gather adversaries' secrets. But you write in the lead graph on the cover of this magazine that American citizens need to be watching what they're saying. So are they spying on Americans?
Well, certainly. That was the whole controversy over the warrantless eavesdropping program under President Bush. It was eavesdropping on Americans. The NSA was formed, like the Marines or other organizations that are formed for foreign wars. It was formed to eavesdrop outside the United States. The Marines aren't used to, you know, police the streets of the United States. And the NSA wasn't used to police the electronic environment of the United States, eavesdrop on U.S. citizens. It was designed to eavesdrop on foreign countries, foreign governments, and foreign people. So this is a big change. NSA switching to eavesdrop on Americans. It did that in the Nixon administration. It violated the law back then, and it violated the law when it was first created. For 30 years, it eavesdropped illegally on U.S. communications until it was discovered in 1975. So it's had a history of eavesdropping illegally on U.S. citizens and then lying about it, saying that we aren't doing it when in reality they are doing it.
So are you saying, according to your sources, this Utah data center that they're building, which won't be ready until 2013, what they're going to be doing, getting people's Google searches, emails, telephone calls, etc., that's illegal?
Well, there's a law, it's called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act, and that determines what's legal and illegal. But NSA has its own internal guidelines on what it can do, which is top secret. And so its definition of words, such as intercept, is not the Webster's Dictionary definition. Their definition of intercept, you can pull all this information in, but it's not technically intercepted until you actually listen to it. So there's a problem of definitions, there's a problem of truth-telling a lot of times with NSA, and there's a problem of the capability to intercept so much information at all times.
The NSA chief was asked about your story specifically, and what you wrote and on the issue of American citizens. I want to show that moment in a congressional hearing just last month.
Does the NSA routinely intercept American citizens' emails?
No.
Does the NSA intercept Americans' cell phone conversations?
No.
Google searches?
No.
Text messages?
No.
Amazon.com orders?
No.
Bank records?
No.
What judicial consent is required for NSA to intercept communications and information involving American citizens?
Within the United States, that would be the FBI lead. If it was a foreign actor in the United States, the FBI would still have the lead and could work that with NSA or other intelligence agencies as authorized. But to conduct that kind of collection in the United States, it would have to go through a court order, and the court would have to authorize it. We're not authorized to do it, nor do we do it.
James Banford, what do you make of his reaction?
Well, again, the term was interception, and NSA has its top secret definition of what interception means. And if you remember, just a few years ago, President Bush was asked whether the NSA intercepts communications, and he said no. At the very same time, they were conducting the warrantless eavesdropping operation. They asked officials back in the 70s about it, and they denied doing it when they'd been doing it for 30 years. So the problem is that NSA doesn't have really much accountability. There is very few times the NSA director is actually asked to testify. This is just a sort of offhand comment that was made by one congressman who happened to ask one question. And I think there really has to be a really good congressional investigation on what NSA's capabilities are, what it can do, and what it does do.
So why is the Utah data center necessary? I mean, why are they building it there in Utah?
Well, they're building it there. I think Senator Orrin Hatch had a lot to do with it. He was chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee for quite a while, and very powerful senator. Plus, they've got the area. It's a very big area, this Camp Williams, where they're building it. It's a very open military base in Utah, and also I think the cost of electricity is cheaper there than it is, certainly than it is in Maryland, where their headquarters is, and a lot of other places in the country. So there's a variety of reasons of why they put it there.
It should be ready in 2013. The cost, $2 billion. How much will it cost just to build it? $2 billion. How much will it cost to run it? You mentioned electricity.
Yeah, it'll probably be, I think, $40 million a year, something like that, to run it. It's hard to say how much exactly, but somewhere around there, somebody estimated.
And why is that such an expensive cost? I mean, what's going on in there that the electricity cost is that high?
Well, you need several things. You need all these servers in there to store all the data, and then one of the big costs is the cooling. You have to cool all these computers and all these servers, all these technological devices in there. You need to cool them, and that takes a lot of electricity to run the cooling machines, the air conditioning.
You mentioned computers. A special supercomputer was built for the Utah data center. Talk about that.
Well, as I said, one of the NSA's jobs is code breaking. A lot of the information NSA is going to pick up to put into that center will be encrypted information. It'll be foreign encrypted, such as foreign military, diplomatic, and U.S. encryption. There's a lot of communications people send every day, whether it's you're buying a book from Amazon or whatever it is, you're sending credit card information, all that's encrypted. Personal information is encrypted, legal information a lot of times is encrypted. So there's a lot of encrypted information, and in order to break a code, there's two things that you really need more than anything else. You need a lot of data. You can't break a code if you have like one message or two. You need to see patterns. So if you have 200,000 messages, it's much easier to see patterns in that. And then you need a computer that's going to look for those patterns and sift through all these combinations. It's called brute force. And they need a computer that will do it very, very quickly. And that's what they're building, is the world's fastest computer down in Tennessee, the same place they built the atomic bomb in World War II.
And how fast is this computer?
Well, it operates at what's known as petaflop speeds, which is, I think it's a quadrillion operations a second. So they're somewhere around 10 petaflops now, so 10 quadrillion operations a second, and they're trying to advance it 1,000-fold to a zettaflop, I think it is, which will be, I don't even know what that number
Right.
is, so it's very fast.
I mean, you talk about the amount of data going through when you talk about everybody's emails and Google searches and all that. I mean, some of the terms that you throw out there, I don't know people have even heard of before when it comes to, people have heard megabytes and gigabytes, but how many bytes are we talking about of data?
Well, I mentioned yottabytes.
Yeah.
Yottabyte is the highest. They haven't created a term beyond yottabytes yet. Yottabyte is, if you translate it into pages, it would be about 500 quintillion pages of text. And you can store an awful lot of information in a building that's, or in a facility that's going to be 1 million square feet. When you figure you could put terabyte, I've seen on Swiss Army knives now, they have a blade that's actually a terabyte of data. So you could put an awful lot of data in a building the size of the NSA data center in Utah.
Here's a graphic in your piece with a look at the center and what will be in there. It will encompass 1 million square feet. Who will work there and how many?
Well, there won't, actually building it is where most of the jobs come in. There'll be about 10,000 jobs in terms of building this thing for several years.
Contractors.
Contractors, yeah, and then actually working in the facility, there'll only be maybe 200 at the most because it's just basically babysitting the electronics, making sure everything's working. If something goes out, replacing it. But the actual analysis will be done externally. It'll be done at NSA headquarters or NSA listening posts via secure fiber optic links.
This data center is top secret, what they do. The contractors had to be sworn to secrecy in order to get this bid. You talk about the groundbreaking ceremony where Senator Hatch and local authorities were there and said, well, we're breaking ground here, but we can't tell you what's going to be going on. So how did you get this information?
Well, I've been writing about NSA for actually 30 years. My first book on NSA, The Puzzle Palace, came out in 1982. So, and I've done 3 books on NSA and numerous articles on NSA. So I've been following it for many, many years. So I've developed a great number of sources on NSA over the years. And one of my key sources for this article, actually the most senior official I've ever interviewed who's gone on the record, is Bill Binney. He was a very, very senior official who was basically the person who designed the entire worldwide eavesdropping network for NSA. He automated the worldwide eavesdropping network for NSA, and he left NSA soon after NSA began illegally eavesdropping on Americans. He'd been there almost 40 years, and then he couldn't be there while they were doing what he considered illegal eavesdropping, so he left, and he told me that we explained basically how NSA was doing all this eavesdropping, and then where it was doing it from, and the methods, and how many. I think he said there were it was something like 320 million calls a day they were intercepting. So he explained the enormous capability of NSA, and he said at the end, you know, we're this far away. Put his 2 fingers together and about an inch apart, and said we're this far away from a turnkey totalitarian state. This is from somebody who was a senior official, the equivalent of a general at NSA, had been there for nearly 40 years.
James Banford, investigative reporter, wrote the piece for Wired magazine. As he said, an author on the NSA's most recent book, The Shadow Factory, the ultra-secret NSA from 9/11 to the eavesdropping on America. Let's get to phone calls here. Robin is first. She's a Republican in New Haven, Michigan. Go ahead, Robin.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have several comments to make. I hope I can get them all out. I remember 15, 20 years ago hearing about this big mega computer system that they had in Belgium. I think this one will put the Belgium one to shame. The other comment I have is that going back to Hitler's time, the people that became IBM had a tracking and tracing system, and that was how they were able to round up all the Jews. And I think this is an outrage. And I mean, you had General Petraeus coming out saying that they're going to be putting tracking devices in our appliances, our microwaves, our dishwashers, I mean, our phones. I mean, there's no escaping it. There's cameras on every corner. Everything we do. We live in the biggest police state. I mean, it's just incredible what our country has become. It's a tyrannical, overpowering system.
All right, Robin, so what about that sentiment, Mr. Banford? Is she accurate?
Well, I think there is the problem today is that you do have all this technology out there, and there's very few people that are saying no to it. There's very few congressional hearings on where we're going in terms of surveillance, and I think it is a cross-party issue. I think Republicans, Libertarians, and liberals are all concerned about this issue because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you couldn't do that. The only way people communicated was either a regular telephone and hanging in your kitchen that was attached by a wire, or the mail, and the mail was sacrosanct. You couldn't open the mail. There was just no scandals of illegally opening mail. And today, everybody communicates by email, which is available to NSA. They talk on cell phones as you're driving down the street. You send tweets. There's all kinds of, you go on Facebook, you look on Google, you do page searches. So you can pretty much, you watch a person for about a week or two, you can pretty much get that person's life down pat by watching their electronic footprint for about a week.
What about, though, that information might not tell you much. What about the encrypted information, and how easy is it to get that information if you, to get into people's data on their disks or on their hard drives? I mean, explain that process.
Well, if it's encrypted, it's much more difficult to get in. What NSA and other agencies, the FBI, for example, would try to do first, if they could, is to try to find your password, which there are various programs you could put out to find the password, and then you get in, then you don't have to do what's known as brute force. They would do that mostly on large-scale encryption, that they would want to get the entire network and how it works. But they would always try to subvert somebody in a foreign country that works on computers or works in the network to try to get the information. But it is much more difficult, obviously, if it's encrypted. The problem is with encryption is you can buy some encryption, but to a large degree you have to have the person you're communicating with also have the encryption. You can't send an encrypted message to somebody who doesn't have it, or they won't be able to read it.
Mm-hmm. And so how good is the United States on breaking encrypted code?
Well, it's hard to say. It's, again, one of the NSA's biggest secrets, but, during World War II, the Germans thought they had the world's most secure communications system, the Enigma machine, and the British, with American help, was able to break it. Same with the Japanese Purple Code, the very sophisticated code. The NSA, or actually predecessor NSA, was able to break that encryption during World War II, and so it's very, very difficult to break codes, but that's what NSA's job is to break codes. So obviously they do it.
Yeah, and that's what JKL on Twitter wants to know. The NSA is the world's largest user of data storage. Storage server companies are making bank. Is that true? The NSA is the world's largest user of data storage?
I can't say that accurately. I would think that they certainly are up there in the top few. I mean, Google probably stores a lot. There's probably a lot for Facebook or whatever, but NSA probably pulls in more. Well, obviously NSA intercepts more communication than any place else, and it's got to have a place to store it. So I'd say it's probably accurate.
The Wired magazine story, Inside James Banford piece, in secret listening rooms nationwide, NSA software examines every email, phone, call, and tweet as they zip by. Chris, Democratic caller, New Haven, Connecticut.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call, and thanks for C-SPAN. I find it really interesting, Mr. Banford. You do really good work.
Thank you.
You focus so much at the early part of the article on the history of the area where this center is. And you focused a lot on the polygamy that was originally there. And I'm wondering if you're implying that there's an alien mindset here that's different from most Americans that allows these people to trample our civil rights. And basically, as that man said, is basically, I forget what the term you said, using his fingers apart this far apart from, oh, a totalitarian state.
All right, let's get a response. Mr. Banford.
Yeah, I mean, what was very interesting when I was looking into where they were building this data center is they built it in this little town of Bluffdale, Utah. And the only other thing that I found of note in Bluffdale was the fact that it was also home to the second largest sect of polygamists in the country. So I thought it was very interesting. I just had two paragraphs there sort of looking at this combination of the secretive NSA people coming into this little town, and they're listening for these encrypted messages from space, and then you have the polygamists in there also who were listening for messages from space to some degree or from the heavens. And they're both fairly secretive groups because polygamy is legal in the United States. So it was very interesting that you had this secretive group of eavesdroppers sharing the same little town with this second largest sect of polygamists in the country. And it was, the town even had to expand its boundaries to incorporate the entire facility, the million-square-foot NSA facility. So it is a very interesting little note that the two groups there cohabiting the same little town.
Port Orange, Florida. Philip, independent caller.
Talking about polygamy, let me just say this. The two-party system is married to the military-industrial complex, James, and I recommend for all those listening that the best book you wrote was Body of Secrets. It's one of the greatest books I ever read. I'm an activist. I've been out there working with the 25%, it's called 25% solution, and our goal is to get the military spending cut by 25% and send the money back, to the cities and states to help save jobs and to rebuild the economy. What the people don't realize is that 56 cents out of every federal tax dollar that you and I and the young lady send to the federal government last year goes for military spending, which I'm sure part of is for this whole complex that you're talking about. 56 cents out of every dollar, it's outrageous.
All right, Philip, so do we know what the NSA's overall budget is every year and how many employees they have?
Well, it's all secret, but the budget is enormous. It's probably the largest intelligence budget in the country. NSA is about 3 times the size of the CIA, and in terms of personnel, it's probably about 3 times the size also. It's hard to say, somewhere 30, 40,000 people, something like that. But it is a extremely expensive agency because it has so much hardware, and it has satellites, and it has people all over the world. And in the article, the Wired magazine article, I write I show all this new building that NSA has been going on in the last 10 years. They're building new listing posts in Georgia, in Texas, in Colorado, in Hawaii, putting new satellites up, putting new dishes, and their listing post in England. So it's, and their headquarters are spending another $2 to $3 billion on expanding its headquarters. So, and then you got the new supercomputer facilities down in Tennessee. So it's an enormous building program, and I agree with the caller that there's far too much military spending, and it's this, Eisenhower warned of the military-industrial complex. Now it's the intelligence, security, and military-industrial complex that's gobbling up so much money when we could be spending it for things much more usefully in the United States. One other point is the fact that it would be good if all this money was usefully spent, but NSA missed the first World Trade Center attack. It missed the attack on the USS Cole. It missed the attacks on the East African embassies. It missed the attack on 9/11. It missed the attacks on, or missed the underwear bomber who flew into Detroit on Christmas Day, and they missed the Times Square bomber. So, if you got something for all that money, it might be a different story, but the point is they spend all this money, and they collect so much information. It's not a lack of information that they have, it's too much information that they collect.
Supporters of NSA, though, might say, we don't know how many they have caught, though. I mean, you're pointing out what they haven't been able to catch, but perhaps we have no idea because it's top secret how many other times they're catching.
Well, I've interviewed a
potential
lot of
attacks.
sources at NSA, including Bill Benny. I think I would have found out if there was some massive terrorist operation that they stopped, and I've never heard of one yet.
Boring File Clerk on Twitter. NSA is infringing on freedom of speech and of association. What constitutional authority grants them this power?
Well, they have this, well, let me back up for a second. NSA is a very unusual agency. It's extremely unusual. Every other agency in the U.S. government was formed in Congress. There were bills creating an agency. There were hearings on whether they should have one. The CIA was created that way. There was a bill put before Congress. They debated it. It was created in law. NSA isn't like that. NSA was never created in law. It was created by a secret, it's actually a top secret memorandum signed by Harry Truman in 1952. It was created in absolute secrecy. Congress wasn't even allowed to know about it. Even its name was supposed to be secret for years until it began leaking out. So NSA was created in an enormously secret method, unlike any other agency. And since then, it has lived in this very unique world where very few people are ever allowed to ask questions about it. The director hardly ever speaks in public before Congress or anything. So it's an agency has very little accountability. The only law in terms of NSA's eavesdropping is this law called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Amendments Act, which actually watered down the original law, which was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act created in 1978. And that put this court, it was a very secret court called the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, between the NSA and the public. So if NSA wanted to eavesdrop on a U.S. citizen, it had to go to the court. And that's what the Bush administration bypassed and broke the law by doing that. And then after that, the law was watered down to water down the effectiveness and the role of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court in NSA's eavesdropping.
John, a Republican, St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, John, you're on the air.
Hi. I have a member of my not immediate family, just a more or less distant relative who is a high-ranking officer in Air Force intelligence, and he has to be vetted every year. And they ask him repeatedly why my two sons married foreign nationals, one from Germany and the other from Spain, which are our allies, I was told. And then the other questions get even more interesting. My hobby is paintball war games. I'm active on the internet forums, and I frequently use terms like RPG, law, tank, silencer, etc. And they asked him about my political leanings in great detail, my attitudes towards the government in great detail, and you know, if you want to connect the dots, it's because Big Brother is listening.
Mr. Banford.
Well, you know, that's the problem is you're an innocent citizen who's never done anything wrong, and your comments could be taken completely out of context, and that's how you get 1 million people on the watch list, and that's how you get so many innocent people. And, you know, it's not a problem of just being thrown off an airplane. You may not even be on the list that is a no-fly list, but you could be on the NSA blacklist, which means that if you secretly somehow, if you had, say, a relative or a son that wants to go to the one of the service academies, they may not get in because they see that you, from these mistaken intercepts that they're getting, indicate that you're not a loyal American citizen, or you're applying for a small business loan and you don't get it. You may not know why, but it may be because you're on this secret blacklist, this watch list that NSA has. So those are some of the dangers, and that's why when people say, well, I never do anything wrong, so why should I care about it? That's why you should care about it, because there's 1 million people, and who knows how many more may be on there that never did anything wrong, but they're on there, and they're not going to send you a letter in the mail saying, oh, you're on the watch list, you're just not going to get that loan you applied for, or somebody, as this gentleman just mentioned, going to be questioned because they mistakenly think that the person's involved in terrorism or something.
How is it that the NSA is getting this information? out of, how is it that they're getting it? I mean, what is the role of telecommunications companies, AT&T, Verizon, Google? Are they allowing NSA to tap?
They are. They've been doing it ever since NSA was created in 1952. Actually, if you want to go back to the predecessor to NSA in 1946, the telecommunications have always known it was illegal to help these agencies do it, and they've always gone along and done it. And just this last time was the warrantless eavesdropping during the Bush administration. Once again, AT&T and the other companies just saluted smartly and did whatever NSA asked them to do, regardless of the fact that it was a violation of the law. And they suffered no penalties for it because Congress passed a law saying they can't be prosecuted and they can't even be sued. They gave them total immunity for what happened. So there's really no incentive for these companies to obey the law. And if you get another president like Bush or Nixon who comes in and says, and Nixon used it largely for, a lot of times for political reasons also. So that's the problem. If you have, give immunity to these companies for violating the law, then the next president come along can use it to subvert his political opponent or to use it for nefarious ways as the Nixon administration did.
Gracie on Twitter, what would happen if we got rid of the NSA? Defund them, fire them, what would happen?
Well, I don't know. It'd be an interesting question. I'm not a supporter of doing away with the NSA, but I am in favor of putting the NSA on a leash so that they can't get away with doing what they did during the Bush administration or operate in absolute secrecy in a democracy. So I would like to see some compromise where NSA gets the funding it needs, but doesn't get the funding that is so excessive that it's getting now. And with no questions asked. The Congress asks no questions of NSA. And at the end of, not this article, but the next article I wrote about NSA, you know, I said, who's listening to the listeners? And that's the problem. Nobody's really paying attention to the people who are doing the eavesdropping.
Do the intelligence committees up on Capitol Hill have oversight of NSA?
Well, they do, but the problem is, well, the Senate Intelligence Committee and the House Intelligence Committee do, but the role has shifted. When these committees were created around the mid-'70s under Senator Frank Church, for example, the first Senate Intelligence Committee, he was very aggressive in taking on his role as protecting the American public from these agencies. And he did an enormous search. That's how they first found out that NSA had been illegally eavesdropping for 30 years. But since that time, Congress has shifted its role pretty much, and now it's basically a churning squad for the NSA. If an administration isn't giving the intelligence community enough money, they're lobbying for more money going to the NSA. So it's a complete switch from this hard oversight to a lackadaisical, well, we can't say anything about NSA and they can do whatever they want attitude.
James Banford, who writes many books about the NSA, wrote the Wired cover piece. Inside of the piece, he writes, once it's operational, this Utah data center, which comes with a price tag of $2 billion for construction, will become, in effect, the NSA's cloud. The center will be fed data collected by the agency's eavesdropping satellites, overseas listening posts, and secret monitoring rooms and telecom facilities throughout the U.S. All that data will then be accessible to the NSA's code breakers, data miners, China analysts, counterterrorism specialists, and others working at its Fort Meade headquarters and around the world. Georgie, Democratic caller in California. Morning.
Good morning. I've always found this interesting, and with my age, I've always known that they've been doing this. But now they're doing it where people are actually getting arrested for things they've done 5 years ago. And it's been things they've said on their cell phone. And there's, so that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out in California. And in Los Angeles, it's going to set a precedent if it hasn't already been set. I don't know if it's already been set or not. But if anything you say on your cell phone, you get red flagged. And people know they're red flagged. But then there's so many that don't. And they find themselves behind bars 5 years later for something they said 5 years ago. You know, so to me, it's absolutely insane. We've lost this country. The people, the citizens of this country need to take this country back and make it a democracy.
All right. Chris, a Republican in Las Vegas.
Thank you for your work, Mr. Banford.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
As one who also connects dots out here, I have found that this Utah Center seems to be the crowning jewel of what was originally inspired under 10 U.S.C. 2358, the Strom Thurmond NDAA Act of 1961. And I find it likely that there's an incorporative quality of it that interfaces it with the smart meters through the smart grid system that enables those two-way transmitters on your home to create a virtual wired prison via the wires in your home that you can't see, and possibly the introduction of mind-altering psychoelectronic waves into your home via the subcarrier on the 60-cycle AC frequency.
All right, that was Chris in Las Vegas. We'll hear from Corrine in Independent in Dallas.
Yes, hi.
Morning.
Good morning. Hope everyone is well. Thank you. Mr. Banford, my question to you is that you mentioned that Congress needs to launch an investigation into the, I feel, are the illegal tactics of what the NSA are doing. But how is that possible when Congress are pretty much allowing and, you know, passing legislation to allow the NSA to do what they're able to do?
Mr. Banford?
Well, all those questions are very good, and the question that the gentleman just asked, that's the problem. The Congress doesn't have an incentive to look into NSA, because the problem with the Congress right now is that no Congress person ever wants to look weak on terrorism, because they know that their opponent is going to say, well, you voted against this new bill to put the data center in Utah, which actually isn't even a bill. NSA just does it. So that's the problem. The problem is that there's too many Congress people that are not willing to go out on a limb and say that we've got too much surveillance going on, because they're so afraid of being accused of being weak on terrorism. So anything that the administration suggests or proposes, or anything that NSA comes up with, is okay, because it's going to fight this war on terrorism. And to be opposed to it is to open yourself up to criticism from your future opponent, who's going to say you're weak on terrorism. And I think that's a serious problem. How you get around it, you have to have congressmen or Congress people that have a lot of moral fiber to stand up against these agencies.
How has the Obama administration responded to the NSA?
Well, it's done the same as I was just saying. They're very weak on the whole issue of privacy. President Obama, when he was running for office, said he was totally against what NSA was doing, this illegal warrantless eavesdropping, and that he would vote against any expansion of NSA's power. He would even filibuster against it, and he said he would vote against any immunity to the telecom companies that illegally assisted NSA. And then when push came to shove, and it actually came up for a vote, he voted in favor of expanding NSA's surveillance capability, and he voted in favor of immunity to the telecom companies. And since then, the surveillance, U.S. surveillance under Obama has increased enormously from the Bush years. I mean, now they're talking about drones flying over the United States, collecting pictures and eavesdropping, and as a few people have mentioned, General Petraeus, the new head of the CIA, came out a few days ago, or last week, I guess, a couple weeks ago maybe, saying that there's all these connections now to people's electronics in their houses, their dishwasher, their electronic components and everything, and that the CIA feels it has a responsibility to monitor these things. You know, nobody's saying stop. Everybody's just saying, uh-oh, war on terrorism, we better let them do whatever they want to do.
Cape Cod, Massachusetts. Clay, Democratic caller.
Thank you very much, C-SPAN, Greta, and thank you, Mr. Banford. I thoroughly enjoy your books, Puzzle Palace and Body of Secrets. I have a question for you. In 2008, I had attended the conference where Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Gary Ruffhead spoke about the 10th Fleet. As you well know, I think the 10th Fleet is a reinvigoration from the FDR era of anti-submarine sweeping by American forces. I believe there was about 50 at the time. However, as I understand it, the 10th Fleet is now going to incorporate an additional 44,000 employees on top of, I believe, 13,000 employees for intelligence gathering, specifically electronic eavesdropping. I'd like to know if you've heard of this, about this program. And by the way, some of these directors, the president was a former NSA director, that some of these programs, what their budget is, and what they're tasked for. I would be very much like to hear your comments on this. Thank you very much.
Well, it's a good question. It's expanded enormously. There is this entire fleet now of cyber warriors. That's the new war. We're creating an enormous. You're always looking for new wars out there, and now they're latching on to cyber war is the latest thing. These contractors, contractors out there, they need some place to make money, and they're making lots of money on these cyber wars. And as you mentioned, there's a new fleet. The fleet is just going to be made up of eavesdroppers and cyber warriors.
James Banford, unfortunately, we have to leave it there. Thank you for your time this morning.
Appreciate it, Greta.
The piece is the April edition of Wired magazine about the NSA's biggest spy center, building the country's biggest spy center. Thank you.
Appreciate it.